Back on the road again, heading back to Orlando for Howl-O-Scream Orlando. First year they've ever done this haunt. I don't know if you can see it behind me. Actually, I just saw it. Yeah, there it goes. I am basically running through or into or both of a storm here. It was pouring rain as I was heading west, and now that I'm getting more towards Orlando, it just seems to be getting more thunderstormy. So I really don't know what that means for tonight. I don't know if that means that the scare zones are all going to be shut down, because I think if there's lightning, that's a high possibility. I think there's a couple rides that are supposed to be open. Probably not likely happening if it is lightning in the area. I assume the houses will still be good to go, but I know from Busch Gardens, Howl-O-Scream in the past, if there are elements that are semi-outside, those usually got shut down during bad weather. I know there's not a ton of houses at this. Like Halloween Horror Nights was like 10 houses. I think that was more than they'd ever done before, if I remember right. This, I think, has 4 houses, 4 scare zones. So I'm anticipating a shorter night or a shorter list of things to do. But if a bunch of things are shut down because of the rain, at least for the beginning of the event, it may make it a little crazier towards the end to go and get stuff done. Either way, haven't been to SeaWorld in years and years and years. Like, it's been a long time since I've been in SeaWorld. Granted, for Busch Gardens, it was the same thing with Howl-O-Scream there, that I hadn't been there probably longer than I hadn't been to SeaWorld. I hadn't been to Busch Gardens, and you know, there's the horror stuff that got me back in the park. The other thing is, SeaWorld Orlando is where they filmed Jaws 3, so maybe we'll see some of the filming locations from Jaws 3. Okay, maybe not necessarily a filming location, but where that movie belongs, so it's appropriate. So, Howl-O-Scream at SeaWorld was definitely a bit different from its Busch Gardens counterpart. I'm going to say a lot of positive things about this event, I think, overall, but one thing that I think they really could have done better with was just kind of a general sense of communication. The ticket, when I bought it, had said something to the effect of the gates open at 7, or the event opens at 7, but you could get in at 6. But as you go into the park, the big thing to head towards is this gate labeled Howl-O-Scream. And there was already a line forming, and it was before 6 o'clock, so I think most people in that line were assuming that we were going to be let in at 6 o'clock into the park from that gate. From what I've heard from other people, it sounds like you actually had to go to the main gate of the park to be able to get in at 6 and actually do other things prior to the start of Howl-O-Scream. I met somebody later in the day that had like a wristband, so I'm assuming that's what that was an indicator that he was allowed to stay past closing. They didn't do that at this back gate. So the Howl-O-Scream at Busch Gardens used to basically let you in, I think, like an hour or 2 hours early. This one said you can get in at 6, but really all they did was let you into kind of a holding area that had a gift shop and a bar, which you can see behind me, which has like dancing sirens in it, which is kind of cool. It just seems like a ploy to sell drinks, and I'm definitely not suckered into that, right? It's far from the worst thing. Like, I ended up picking up a drink, one of their specialty cocktails that just tasted like pure alcohol, then a little bit of pumpkin, then a lot of orange juice, and then ice. Like, it was incredibly watered down by the time I finished it, but it was whatever. And then once the park actually opened, they let us in. And I had thought, not having gone to SeaWorld for a long time, looking at the map, I thought this was like Howl-O-Scream Tampa, where it was going to be using the entire park, but it's actually only using the very right edge of the park. But the map is drawn so that it doesn't look like there's much over to the left, even though there's at least 50% of the park, if not more, to the left on the map that's missing from the Howl-O-Scream map. So the way this pushes you in, it's kind of like back behind one of their like stage setup areas. This is really kind of narrow corridor going basically between this hub that they had us all waiting in. This really narrow bridge heading kind of backstage behind where one of the roller coasters is, and then behind this stadium area. And you follow a path around, and it finally then opens back up into the park proper. Now, this first section going down into the main part of the park is actually a scare zone, but right around the time everything opened up, it started pouring rain, like literally as we were walking in, as like the group was going in. There was some cover provided by these stadium seats, and like half the people just kept going into the park, and then half the people were like hiding under the bleachers to try to like not get soaked. So because of this, all the scare actors were off the streets. which is a little disappointing. And seeing the massive rush of people going in, I knew there was a house right up front. I actually found out later there were 2 houses up front, just one was really hard to see. So I ended up going more towards the back of the park to check out the houses back there, figuring there would be lower line waits, which ended up being very true. First house I did was Dead Vines, which, after going on Wicked Growth twice on Wednesday night, it keeps being a little difficult for me to remember what the name of this house is. I will say none of these houses had much in the way of an outdoor facade to them. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things at Halloween Horror Nights, but I think all these backstage areas that they had us going into were very utilitarian. Even Busch Gardens, I don't remember their houses being in quite such like a utilitarian feeling area. And all you think about is because of the nature of the animals SeaWorld has in the park, you know, mostly being aquatic, that there's a lot more systems maybe that need to be in place to support those animals, and maybe they have less just kind of open area backstage. Plus I think Busch Gardens is more heavy on the rides than SeaWorld is, so you know, this is more probably a higher percentage zoo than it is theme park, I think, at this point. So nothing really like super cool in the areas leading up to these queues, but once you like actually get in and they actually are pulsing people through instead of just conga lining, at least when the houses had low wait times, they actually sent me in literally by myself. I had nobody there with me, and they just waited for the group before me to go and then sent me and then waited to send anybody behind me. So as you're first walking through, it's like this outdoor area with a bunch of like potted plants and things all over the place. You're kind of winding through, and then you go into, I assume it's supposed to be this manor. I think some parts of the scenes are supposed to be outside still, but like you're inside physically. And as you go, this like vegetation's getting thicker and thicker, and there's like monsters popping out of the vines and stuff, and there's people in like ghillie suits that are hiding in amongst the plant life and everything. I think this is the one, could have been one of the first 2 houses I went to, so I apologize if I have this off, but I noticed one of the scare actors had one of those, I think they're Aztec death whistles. I think Aztec's the right term, but I could be wrong. And if you're not familiar, they're basically a little whistle that you blow into, and like depending on how you hold it and how you like move your hand around where the air comes out, it generates different sounding scream noises. Now that was brilliant, like, you know, if you're gonna be working in a haunted house and have to scream all the time, if you could kind of like cup something up to your mouth where it's not super obvious what it is if you're not like really paying attention, and use that to scream and not have to ruin your vocal cords for the entire haunt season, I thought that was kind of a cool thing. And I don't know, with the vines it kind of felt like it fit in. One thing that these houses had going on that I didn't realize until after the fact was SeaWorld's whole theme for everything was based around sirens, like the mythical, you know, creatures that lure sailors to their doom or whatever. So each of these houses, I guess, had a siren in it. The only one that was super memorable to me was in like one of the houses. I don't really like remember them being in the other houses, but people tell me that they were there, so I'm just gonna believe them. So the idea, like each of these, like there was something that happened relating to the siren that caused them to curse these houses. So everything kind of had like a big overlaying theme, I guess, in theory.
So in all reality, I don't think there's too many spots from Jaws 3 that's like really easy to identify in here. But I think out in this lagoon is where they had supposedly that like whole undersea thing where the shark breaks in, and this was supposed to connect somehow from Orlando back out to the Atlantic Ocean, which is definitely not something that would happen, but I think it was back in there.
Next up, I went to Captain's Revenge. Now, if you've seen my previous Howl-O-Scream videos, the one in Tampa, there was a house there called the Black Spot, I believe, which was pirate themed. It was my least favorite house every year. And honestly, going into this, I was really concerned it was going to be more of the same. But this house was awesome. Once again, pulsing people through. The first time I went through, I basically had the house. It felt like I had the house to myself. I did not have the house to myself, but it felt like I did. And once again, after Halloween Horror Nights, where being conga lined through, there were a lot of times where I missed like almost every scare in the house. It felt really damn good to feel like I was getting every freaking scare in the house. And even with Dead Minds, all the houses honestly had a lot of misdirect. And part of this is aided by the fact they didn't have the plexiglass like Universal did, so it wasn't really obvious where the, what they call the boo holes are. But they would have a scare actor on one side that would jump out and do something, and then they'd have another scare on the other side of the room. And like, it was constantly pulling you one way then the other, and even going through multiple times, I had trouble like remembering where things were and anticipating where people were going to jump out. And I jumped more in the single house at Howl-O-Scream than I did, I think, the entire night at Halloween Horror Nights. And not that that I was scared or anything, but like I startle relatively easily, so it was kind of fun, like going through that and seeing all that. So it was actually kind of cool to experience that as a jaded haunted house fan. I forget if I said this already, but the rooms were relatively large as well, and they'd use a lot of things hanging down to try to break your eye line on everything. So, you know, it'd be a room where you almost don't know exactly even where the exit is at first, and so you're kind of like moving around some, and the scare actors kind of almost push you towards the exit by jumping out at you, and it's like, well, not there, I guess I'll go this way. They had like pieces of flag hanging down, or pieces of the sails hanging down and things. It was undead, creepy pirates again, but so well done and super enjoyable. And at this point, I got a little lost. There was only one real sign kind of coming out of what would have been like the second scare zone that tells you exactly where you're supposed to be going, or like has arrows pointing to different houses and shows and things. And because of the nature of how this thing kind of wrapped around the side of the park, it didn't make completely clear like directional lines of where you're supposed to go. These first two I went were kind of on this one arc up at the top, but it dead-ended. So I knew I had to backtrack. And then the maps they handed out were paper. So on a night where it's pouring rain, by the time I needed to look at the map, it was so soaked I couldn't get it open. It would just tear as I was trying to open up the map. And then, of all things, I could not find a picture of the map online. I was Googling it, and eventually I did find one that I could use, but it took a really long time to find the map online to be able to help me get through to find where I needed to go. So eventually I got back towards the front of the park in the house that I'd skipped originally, which was beneath the ice. After barely waiting for the first two, this one actually had like an hour wait, and I think that was exacerbated not just because of the pulsing, but because there was a cast change in there. The event didn't run particularly long. It ran from like technically 7 o'clock until midnight, and it felt like there was a lot of cast changes. So I don't know if they're really limiting the amount of time the actors are in the houses or what, but it felt like at least once an hour they were changing out the cast. So this one, my first time through, I didn't like as much. A lot of this was because while they were still pulsing, they were pulsing a little faster. So this time I was more in the house with other people. I could clearly see the groups in front of me. And the house, I think, is just overall a little too dark. The idea is kind of like you're in this, like, I think it's supposed to be Arctic, not Antarctic. It was Arctic, I believe. Base. But kind of the whole area, there is a scare zone that actually tied directly into this as well. It was very The Thing-ish, but it was more zombies instead of like alien, creepy thing monster. And like you were going through this base and you would see different pieces of the base, like the bunks or the kitchen or whatever, and see like bloody, gory stuff that happened there, and then these zombies would pop out at you. But being as dark as it was actually really hard to identify like if they even had any kind of zombie makeup on, even what their uniforms or clothing were. So unfortunately that was a little bit disappointing because I feel like there probably was some good theming in there that was just really too hard to see. The other thing is I believe this show building is connected to where they actually have like their Arctic animals, and it was freezing. Probably didn't help that it was wet outside and I was, you know, already soggy, so it probably made it even colder feeling on the inside, but it had that Arctic air feel for sure. Towards the end, it kind of devolved into a lot of loud noises. Like there would be people hiding in places, and they'd have these sticks that I think were supposed to be like ice picks, but they didn't have like a head on them or anything. I think they were just literally sticks in the actors' hands, and they'd be using them to bang on like metal crates, or there was like a corrugated steel wall, they'd like drag it down. This house also had a feature where if you were at the bar that's next door, people could pay money to have control of, I think it was like an air blast effect or a lighting effect, and actually activate that on people. They had like a video camera feed of the house, and they could try to time their scare to scare people. I think it's a great idea. I'm not entirely sure where it was, so I don't know if it ever went off when I was going through there. Every time I looked at the bar, I didn't see anybody at that area, but obviously if I was out to look at the bar, then I wasn't in the house to be scared by it, so not really sure, but I think it's a really cool idea, and I think especially if like you're going with a group and maybe somebody doesn't want to go in the house, they could kind of have some fun and torture the rest of their group inside if they time it right. Then the last house that was really hard to find was Water's Edge Inn. It's actually the first house when you're walking into the park, but because it's kind of recessed and the sign is behind like these gates, you don't really see it when you're walking in, you only see it if you're walking out. And that's the other bit I kind of meant when I was talking about communication. Actually, one of the other things I forgot to say was that they never said online that I could find that there was a no bag policy, and then people in line waiting to get in were like freaking out because they were being told that their backpacks had to go back in the car. But then the other bit of communication is really that there wasn't a lot of signage pointing you in the right direction, and like even the people working there seemed to be aware of it. They had all over the place, which I hadn't realized that Universal had done away with these until somebody pointed it out that it was at Howl-O-Scream. But Universal used to have like the blood bags you could buy. Like they'd have like zombie nurses walking around with these blood bags full of alcohol, Jello shots or whatever. And Howl-O-Scream had girls dressed as sirens with these syringes of Jello shots, and they were constantly like, you know, yelling out like, "Oh, Jello shots here!" Like, what, trying to get people to pay attention to them and buy them. But I heard some of them joking like, "Jello shots $7, directions $2," and then the guy who was kind of manning the gate in front of this Water's Edge in-house at some point actually ended up walking out into the street and like directing people into the house because he realized that people were bypassing it. This one was really fun. Like, last couple times I went to Howl-O-Scream Tampa, they had Motel Hell. That was my favorite house. It was like a creepy, like, roadside motel and had a bunch of stuff going on in it. This was similar. This was more of a more upscale looking hotel, so it didn't have that sleazy factor built in, I think, that Motel Hell had, but it was still kind of a cool take on that same concept. Like, you walk in and there's like a front desk man like ushering you into this creepy abandoned hotel. You walk in a room. They actually had a cool thing where there was like a mirror and a ghost face would appear in the mirror and scream, and there's this 4-poster bed, and the posts were like wrapped in like linen or whatever, and you walk around it, and then there would be a scare actress like basically hugging onto one of them so you could barely see her, and she was dressed in clothing similar to that cloth on the post, and then she'd jump out. It was like a really good hiding spot for the actress. It was like a bar where the bartender would try to scare you by slamming a drink down, but I found out my second time through there was also a like bookcase with a hidden door that somebody would jump out of, which was really cool. And it was another one where there were a lot of like misdirect scares, like somebody would come at you one way and then somebody would pop out of a laundry basket or something and dressed in laundry. So it was like a stupid thing, but it was actually really cool.
One I forgot to mention when I was recording this video proper was there was one room that was probably supposed to be like a nursery or something, and there was, I believe, an actress in this chair the first time I went through, thrashing so violently in the chair that I swore it had to be an animatronic because that just looked painful to me. But seeing that it wasn't there and there was a different actor doing different things in that chair on subsequent go-throughs of the house, it makes it more impressive because I know that had to be a real person there.
The only thing that I'm disappointed in is there's a hallway you walk down where there's a clear way to go in front of you, and then there's like 2 doors kind of facing each other parallel to you. And the first and third time I went, this is the only house I've done 3 times, there were actors in both of those doors. I was watching somebody's video, and it looks like you actually could choose to take the door going straight on the left instead of going just purely straight. And it was like a slightly different way to the house. If I'd known that, I went 3 times, I would have gone that option. But honestly, with the actor standing there, it did not look like it was an option. It looked like it was a dead end, just piece of the set dressing. But overall, that one was really good too. So by the time I got out of these houses, it was still raining. I'd done all 4 houses they had. So I decided I was going to go back and do Dead Vines again, just to kind of start the cycle over again and see the houses again. By this point, it was a much longer wait. They ended up not pulsing everybody through quite as much. It was still pulsed a little bit, but they were taking larger groups. Like, it wasn't just you or your group. It was, you know, we're going to send 10 people at a time regardless kind of thing. And that definitely detracted a bit from the fun that I had the first time through. It also didn't help that the guy behind me, I couldn't tell if he was drunk or just really southern, but he was bitching the entire time in line about how, like, oh, I have to wait in line to go in a haunted house. This is such bullshit. Like, I get it if you're annoyed by it, whatever, like, it happens, but he was just constantly, he was just a broken record. He just kept saying it over and over again. And I really just want to turn around and be like, dude, if you hate it so fucking much, leave. Nobody's forcing you to stay here. And then even as we were going into the house, he's like, oh, this is fucking lame. Really? That's what that is? Oh, man. Dude, just shut the fuck up. Like, try to enjoy yourself. You know, you paid the money. You're here. You apparently don't want to get out of line for this. So, just try to have fun. I mean, second time through definitely was not, like, if I'd had that experience the first time, I wouldn't have been as excited about it. But it really wasn't bad the second time. It just wasn't as, you know, I guess, intimate as of an experience, as personal of an experience going through it when you have that big of a group. But whatever. Halloween Horror Nights does it all the time. And I still felt like I got the majority of the scares. As I've been walking to this house, however, I did hear the announcement that, it was kind of funny because it was like a generic announcement they had of, like, weather conditions are improving. We will resume normal operations shortly. So, Howl-O-Scream normal operations, I guess, would mean that the rides opened and the scare zones came out. So the exit to Dead Vines, and part of the reason I went to Dead Vines as well, is the exit came out by Infinity Falls, which is their, like, river rapids raft ride. And I'd seen a video of that, and I thought it looked really fun, so I wanted to check it out. And, yeah, it was a 5-minute wait, which almost any theme park means you're going to spend 5 minutes walking through the queue and then get right on the ride, which was the case here. I had the entire raft to myself. I got even more soaked now that the rain had ended. It's pretty cool though, like it's bringing you through. Like at first it's kind of relatively lazy. It brings you past like an actual flamingo exhibit, which I thought was kind of funny. But then like the rapids really pick up. It was much faster than I anticipated it was going to be, and much more violent, especially in the dark. And a lot of it I was going down backwards, so I had no clue where I was going. And then it gets to a thing where it actually like puts you on an elevator. It puts the raft on an elevator and just goes straight up, which is freaky feeling because it feels like, you know, the slightest breeze you're gonna go flying off the back of this elevator, and then it sends you down a big old hill. When I got off, my initial thought was I should just get right back in line and do it again. And then I'm like, but what if the rain comes back? I want to make sure I see all the scare zones. Logical, but I did not know, and I did not see posted anywhere, that Infinity Falls closed at 10. The event goes till midnight, and I believe the roller coaster Mako is open until midnight. But Infinity Falls does not go all night, so I never actually got to go back on it, which is really disappointing. If I'd known it closed that early, I would have definitely gone a second time. So in getting off of that one, it actually brings you right into the middle of a scare zone. This one's called Witchcraft Bayou. You can't tell by the name, it's very Louisiana Bayou themed with a lot of like voodoo priests and priestesses in there. It's kind of a cool thing. One thing I will say about Howl-O-Scream that was really impressive with the scare zones is that the actors were very willing to interact with you. Like even if you weren't participating back, they would run up to you and like try to be like, oh, you gotta turn back, or, you know, just try to like pester you with like creepy questions and things. Definitely felt really cool after Halloween Horror Nights is basically people walking up and then being like, bah! And there was some of that too, but like they actually felt like they were trying to get into their characters and get into putting on a real show for everybody, which was really cool. So I kind of walked like back and forth through this thing. They had little houses set up and little like things where it was like voodoo looking. The women in the scare zone were very active. The men, a lot of times it seemed like they were just kind of like standing there trying to look intimidating. And I saw later in the night they started doing more, but like the first few times through it was kind of funny because they just didn't do anything. They just stood there.
I told you there was. You were like, no, wait. I'm sticking at everyone. I stand in there so we'll figure out how to get
Then I kind of loop back, going back towards the front of the park, and there's a scare zone Deadly Ambush. This is supposed to be, I think it was like 60s themed, like a sleepaway camp. Similar to one they did at Busch Gardens the previous years with Camp DOA. But it's supposed to be like werewolves are attacking these like campers and turning people. So you have like a ranger station. Wasn't there's a ranger like, oh, you gotta help me, I gotta get back into the ranger station.
Won't you help me? You have a phone? You can call for help. I'm locked out of the station. My only phone is in there.
Call for help, call for backup, like telling you not to go in. There's like rednecks in there, like hunters it looks like. Maybe they were partly turning into werewolves. There are people in these like werewolf costumes coming up. Everyone like followed me and just like sitting over my shoulder snarling at me for a good while. Really, really cool, really interactive, I think. It was a lot of fun. They had some great set dressing with like a torn up Winnebago and tents and an outhouse and canoes and stuff. It was definitely a really cool thing. Unfortunately, because of its position and because of the way the whole routing of everything went, I went through that scare zone so many times. That and the Witchcraft Bayou, really. Not that I got sick of it, but it was just like, okay, I've seen this a lot. Really, like, you could avoid most of the scare zones, but this one, if you were going from the front of the park to the back of the park between the two sets of houses, you had to go through this one multiple times. Not a bad thing, but just to be noted, I guess. Then there was Frozen Terror, which came in from where we entered the park, leading up to around where the first haunted houses were. And this tied into the Beneath the Ice scare zone. Like, it was very similar characters. It was supposed to be the same idea. There was more like outpost kind of things around, like the outside of the base as opposed to the inside of the base with the house. Same kind of things where people were in like cold weather zombie costumes. This time clearer because it was better lit outside. The same kind of like sticks. One of them had like a shovel he was scraping across the ground. They also had these like blocky containers, which were the same ones they were using at Universal for the Seek and Destroy for the blood. I saw one of them in the daylight and actually said it was for, I think it was like vegetable oil. So it must be something like how they bulk order oil for the kitchens and stuff, and they just repurpose those. So that makes sense why multiple parks are using these as scare things, as there's waste to begin with, I guess. The only downside of this scare zone and where it is that I think it makes Water's Edge Inn even easier to skip over, because you're in this ice zombie world and then you kind of pop out into this center area that has more ice zombie stuff like the bar and the house. It makes it easier to ignore that there's a house that doesn't go with that theme sitting right in kind of in the middle of it. So not a huge deal, but it was just kind of like, okay, I kind of see further why this house isn't getting the attention it probably is supposed to be getting. And then once again, I got a little lost. I couldn't figure out where to go for the last scare zone, which was Sea of Souls, another pirate-themed one, to go with the Captain's Revenge House. And eventually I realized that you had to go back from the front through Deadly Ambush, through Witchcraft Bayou, and around this big corner past like a stage building where they had a show going on. And it looked like it dead-ended there. That's why I turned back. It looked like it was the roller coaster Mako that they had open. I thought it dead-ended there, but there's this back section where they had this, and it was more just undead pirate stuff. They had some flame effect. It was kind of interesting. It was a dead-end scare zone, so it literally like put you in, you kind of could walk around in a circle and walk back out. It didn't have a ton going on in it, but it was relatively cool. So I went back through all the houses again. I basically got, if I had a good run the first time, the second one was a little more packed, it seemed, and less by myself. And then the houses that I'd had the opposite effect on the first time through, I got the more individual experience the second time through. So I guess it really just depends what time of the night you go through the house. I didn't do fast pass or anything. I did normal lines for all the houses. And besides the normal scare zones, there were also some like roving groups. When I first came in, there were the kind of, I call them the slider scare actors. They're kind of like camo, zombie-ish looking stuff, and they have like pads on their knees and hands that they could jump on the ground and spark. As the night went on, they started popping up more places. There was also like a roving group of what looked like almost corpse painty clowns with chainsaws, which after not getting my roaming clowns with chainsaws at Universal this year, was very welcome to see these guys. And they also had some like roaming siren scare actors through some of the areas. So there were a lot of actors. Once they started populating out everybody, oh, they also had the guys in the ghillie suits in the woods where you couldn't see them just making noise and being creepy, similar to what Tampa does. So I think if I'd gone on a night where it wasn't pouring rain, it would have been a much more immersive experience the whole night through. But overall, it was still like really cool. It just took a while for everybody to be able to get back out. But as I was heading back towards Beneath the Ice, I came back into that hub where basically the two like scare zone trails like terminate, and there was like a hub where this whole area was. And I didn't realize they were in the middle of a show. I thought the show was kind of back in a building somewhere because there were signs that looked like they were leading back back to an amphitheater. It was actually in this circle, just out in the open. There were multiple stages set up around that I had assumed were for a scare zone that hadn't been populated yet because of the rain. But actually had the sirens go up there. They were dancing and kind of telling the story about the basic overlying theme of the house, or the house is in the park for this whole event. So I didn't watch a whole lot of that, but it was cool to see that it was just such a, you know, just kind of in the middle of everything event, or you were really in the middle of it. They would like highlight various stages around the area as you went on. And because of that, the wait that it had been an hour for Beneath the Ice the first time I went, there was like no line when I went then because everybody was distracted by the show, which was kind of cool. So I got to do that one, you know, pulsed basically by myself as well. And it was much better the second time doing it that way. And that was basically it. Went back through Water's Edge Inn for the third time at the end of it because I knew that ended out basically by the exit, and I figured instead of walking through the scare zone to the exit, I'll take the house to the exit. And there was no real line. There was a cash change going on as I went up, and the guy at the door was basically like, hey, do you want to go in like purely by yourself? I was like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay, cool, I'll hold this next group coming up back and just make sure you have time and you'll get everything fresh and, you know, all fresh actors and nobody in your way. So that was a really cool way to end the night. And yeah, that was basically it. Not a ton. Like I said, 4 haunted houses, 4 scare zones, 2 rides, one of which I didn't do, and then some roaming bobs. And I also had 2 shows, including the Siren Song and more of a sit-down show that I didn't do. But I really thought it was cool. Every time I say it felt more like old school Halloween Horror Nights, and I have to agree. It also very much was trying to play to an adult audience. And I feel like sometimes Halloween Horror Nights tries to encompass everybody and tries to make it an event that people can bring their kids to, despite it being scary. This was actually even like a little sleazy at times. The sirens dancing was relatively sexy if you're into fish girls, I guess. But, you know, it had that element to it that to me made it seem like this was much more of an adult thing. Alcohol was more present and promoted in it. It just really felt like it was more intended to be something for adults to go do as opposed to, I don't know, like Halloween Horror Nights is so much fun, but at times it feels kind of sanitized in a weird way or corporate in a way. It's not like SeaWorld isn't a big corporate theme park either, but I think they got some stuff right that Halloween Horror Nights kind of let go. It's also, at least my ticket when I bought it was significantly cheaper than a Halloween Horror Nights ticket ever was, so definitely helps in that regards as well.
For house rankings, it's actually a little difficult to do. I think I'm going to give the bottom spot to Beneath the Ice just because I feel like that was the least impressive of the group. Second and third could really be a toss-up, but I'm gonna say maybe third place would be Dead Vines and second place would be Water's Edge Inn. I think overall the quality of these houses are at a level where, depending on your run through, either could be put in as 2 or 3. And then Captain's Revenge for me was the consistent winner. I think it was a lot of fun and just really well designed.
So I really hope they're able to bring this thing back in future years. I hope maybe they can expand it, do more of the park. I don't know how much more room they have to put these things. Maybe 4 houses was all they physically could accommodate, but I would love to see more. I would love to see it expanded and become, you know, a bigger thing. Obviously, it wasn't perfect, but I think the positives greatly outweighed the negatives with it. So I definitely would recommend checking it out.
I don't know if it's coming across on camera at all, but dead ahead of me is SeaWorld. I'm at a gas station about to head home, but I swear the entire area around here is covered in like a thin layer of fog, and I think it's coming out of the theme park.